Today we're diving into the fascinating world of Beatrix Potter, the genius creator behind some of the most iconic children's stories ever written. Her stories have charmed generations, but are they still a good fit for kids today? I've done a deep dive into the life and work of Beatrix Potter, visited her gardens when I was a teenager, and read her stories. So let's talk about the woman, her legacy, and whether her stories are still relevant and suited for today's little readers. Hello, my name is Linnéa. I'm a Montessori teacher, mom, and a children's book nerd, and welcome to my channel, The Bookworm Club. First, let's have a look at who Beatrix Potter was. Beatrix Potter was not your average children's book author. Born in 1866 in London, she grew up in a wealthy but very strict home. Her parents didn't believe in sending girls to school, so she was educated at home by a governess. But here's the thing. Beatrix was very curious, way beyond what her governess could teach her. She spent hours observing nature, sketching animals, but it was this curiosity that would later inspire her beloved stories. Most people, and me as well, knows Beatrix from her stories. But did you know she was also a groundbreaking scientist? She had a passion for fungi. Yes, mushrooms, and made very detailed and intricate illustrations of them. In fact, she even wrote some scientific papers on mushrooms. But here's the twist. Since she was a woman, the scientific community did not take her seriously. So her scientific papers were presented instead by a man. Unfortunately, her scientific work went mostly unrecognized. So how did all her stories come to life? Well, let's take Peter Rabbit, for example. It all started with a letter. In 1893, Beatrix wrote a letter to a sick child, including a little story about a mischievous rabbit named Peter. She later decided to turn this letter into a whole story. But here's the catch. Publishers was not interested. Can you imagine? One of the most famous children's books in history was rejected by multiple publishers. But Beatrix didn't give up though. She decided to self-publish her book, and it was a hit. The Tale of Peter Rabbit was first published in 1901, and it's been a favorite ever since. Another fascinating thing about this very interesting woman, she was not only a very skilled storyteller and illustrator, she was also a very savvy businesswoman. She was one of the first to merchandise her characters. She created Peter Rabbit dolls and games and tea sets, all long before that was a common thing to do. Basically, she pioneered the idea of turning book characters into a brand, something we are very familiar with today. Beatrix Potter was one of the first to write books that was actually meant for children, and her illustrations are well known and an inspiration to many. Her books wasn't just entertaining, they taught kids about the natural world in a way that's both magical and realistic. Now, I'll be honest. I absolutely love her artwork. Her watercolor illustrations are just so beautiful. But the stories, I have some mixed feelings about those. I think they're a bit harsh and maybe even a bit morbid at times. Let me explain what I mean with that. Let's take the Tale of Peter Rabbit, for example. It's a classic, right? Everyone knows about this little cute bunny in his blue jacket sneaking into Mr. McGregor's garden. But if you think about it, it's quite dark. In the story, it says that Peter's dad was caught and baked into a pie. And Peter himself is almost also caught and cooked. And it's not just Peter Rabbit. If you take the tale of Jemima Puddle-Duck, she almost gets eaten by a fox. In the tale of Squirrel Nutkin, the owl in the story has caught a squirrel, and the owl is trying to skin the squirrel, but the squirrel gets away by breaking his tail in half and running away. I don't know about that. I mean, compared to modern children's books, Beatrix Potter's tales feels more like cautionary tales, which, to be fair, children's books back then, well, that's what they were. Her stories are all beautifully written and illustrated, but the themes, pretty intense for today's kids, right? I also think her books are quite difficult to read out loud, and also the language might be a bit difficult for today's kids, because it's kind of old-fashioned, which isn't strange because they're quite old. And as a kind of modern parent, I find myself thinking when I read these books, do I really want my daughter to read a story where the main character is almost baked into a pie, just like his dad? But of course, it all depends on your kids. If your kids are a bit more sensitive, then maybe I wouldn't read these books. If your kids are fine with it, then maybe you still can. If your kids can't read themselves yet, you can just look at the pictures and make up your own stories. That said, of course, her stories have a lot of value too, especially if you use them as a way to talk to kids about nature and consequences and even history. So are her books even relevant today? Well, yes, I think they are, but with some context. The illustrations are timeless, and her passion for nature is something I think we should celebrate. But I think I'd recommend reading her stories alongside some maybe more modern books that have a more gentle approach to storytelling. Beatrix Potter was truly a woman before her time. She combined her love for nature, her interest in science, and talent for storytelling and illustrations to create something that is so special for so many people to this day. I think we keep coming back to these beautiful books because of the illustrations and the nostalgic factor. And for many people, her stories remind us of a slower and simpler time and of our childhood, which is obviously a beautiful thing. Her legacy will always be part of children's literature, even if her stories might seem a bit harsh by today's standards. And please let me know in the comments, what do you think about all this? Do you think her stories are just fine to read? Do you think her stories are a bit harsh like me? Or do you think maybe I'm just a bit sensitive? And which ones of her books are your favorites? Thank you so much for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe. I post here every week, and I'd love to have you as a member of the Bookworm Club. I'll see you next week, but until then, take care and happy reading. Bye!